Today, we're going to talk about the microbiome, the probiotic culture in the large intestine and throughout the body. This is an amazing subject matter that has evolved expansively in the last 10 years, specifically the last 4 to 5 years. I'm going to take a little bit of a path from whence I started into the microbiome for personal reasons, leading to what has been done today in terms of the research and what has been revealed as of today. And if you're an athlete, you want to be listening in. Do not discount the effect of the microbiome, the probiotic culture, on the immune system and the metabolism for optimal function and optimal human performance. My name is Franco Cavaleri. I'm a biomedical researcher. We do genomic and proteomic research to determine how biohacks and environmental stimuli and nutrient or nutrigenomic activity affects the genome in the context of health and athletic performance. This is another episode of Potential Within. I wrote a book a long time ago, immediately upon winning Mr. IFBB North America, prior to engaging in my experimental medicine work at the Faculty of Medicine. And lo and behold, the last 25 years have really been honed in on studying nutrigenomics and optimization of the genome in the context of athletic performance. And of course, as I get older, I begin to leverage that knowledge and determine how that genome can be affected to optimize health and longevity. I've got a lot of time and effort that has been put into this. Today, we're going to dive into the microbiome. I've got to tell you, there is no research historically that we've done that demonstrates such an impact on health that the microbiome can have over other elements that we want to work on in terms of longevity and even athletic performance. General metabolic health, metabolic syndrome, for instance, the epidemic we have today with diabetes, obesity, is highly correlated, highly related to the microbiome. Research has shown upon testing the microbiome of North Americans, the specific research was done with U.S. citizens, that microbiome is very different than the microbiome of Europeans and of other cultures that live in less developed worlds and lifestyles. And a lot of it has to do with the diet, the availability of fiber, soluble fiber, prebiotics, as they would be called in the supplement industry, versus the probiotics. The prebiotic is the fuel for the microbiota, and the probiotic is the actual bacterium. And this culture that exists in the colon primarily that we speak of is highly diverse. Can exist of as many as 2,000 species of bacteria and fungus, and even viruses that coexist with the bacteria. Now keep something in mind, and this is profound. These bacteria lived on Earth long before we came around and began to evolve as humans. So we co-evolved. And so much so did we evolve intimately with this bacterial soup on the earth that we have become dependent, not independent, but dependent on the biological activity that they deliver. Our system, biological system, is highly limited because it depends on various metabolites that are produced by that culture, the probiotic culture. Now, I want you to keep something in mind because this is profound. We have a distinct and diverse culture in the intestinal tract, primarily the colon. We have a culture of bacterium that actually lives on our skin. Every orifice of the body has a culture of bacteria that protects the orifice from pathogens infiltrating. That's how valuable they are. If the organisms that are friendly, the probiotic culture, diminishes in the nose, the mouth even, the vaginal cavity, the anal cavity and the colon. The ears, if it diminishes, the trachea, if it diminishes, it leaves room for pathogens to infiltrate. And it's not just a mechanical factor according to room availability and space. It's actually a biochemical event that takes place with the microbiotic activity that produces chemicals that feed the colon lining, the colonocytes they're called, fuel them and feed the mucosal membranes and nurture them to produce mucin that protects us. If that bacterial culture is damaged, that mucin layer is diminished, and the bacteria space, the space available for pathogens increases, and the pH and the environment changes so that the pathogens can survive. If the probiotic culture in your gut is healthy and robust, anywhere between 1,000, the diversity has to be just immense diversity, 1,000 to 2,000 species that coexist with us, in us, and in a symbiotic relationship that we depend on. And I'm going to go into the details as to how much we depend on this and how my research on butyrate, short-chain fatty acids, since 1993, way back in 93, has evolved to a point where other researchers have also contributed to unveil a lot of what I had been trying to unveil. And therefore, I mean, that's the nature of research in the public domain, where we can leverage other researchers' work to add to the knowledge that we've accrued in our own research and be able to put pieces to the puzzle to create the picture that may not have been clear when doing your own research. This is what excites me. That culture in the gut produces short-chain fatty acids, a primary one called butyrate. And butyrate propionic acid or propionate is another one. Acetic acid or acetate is another one. Butyric acid is a four-carbon chain. Propionate is a 3-carbon chain. Acetate is a 2-carbon chain, irrelevant to the context of what we're talking about in a moment. But it is that probiotic culture that manufactures these short-chain fatty acids, or volatile fatty acids as they're called. And they are critical signaling mechanisms that not only create an environment in the gut, a pH that nurtures the friendly bacteria, but it also creates a pH and environment that voids pathogens. Now, here's a critical thing. As I began to study butyrate in the context of getting lean for bodybuilding shows, and that was my impetus at the time. The at the time was, how do I create metabolic efficiency? You know, bodybuilders don't have extremely healthy diets. They have robust, abundant diets that are high in protein, and sometimes the fiber needed to support the probiotic culture is voided, especially during times of competition. Two things happen during times of competition. The stress load, the intense workload, all interfere mechanically and biochemically with the probiotic culture. This happens in life in general. I'm not talking about just bodybuilders, but stress can damage the probiotic culture. Chemicals in our foods can damage that probiotic culture. The lack of soluble fiber like inulin. Artichokes are loaded with inulin and really rich in the fuel, in the prebiotic food that culture requires to proliferate. Now, what happens with the soluble fibers that we as human beings cannot digest, but the bacteria can digest? They produce byproducts, the short-chain fatty acids that I mentioned earlier. Those short-chain fatty acids then help to create the environment. Again, I'm repeating this just for clarity so people get this. The environment to void pathogens and fuel the colonocytes. But butyrate is now shown to penetrate and become systemic throughout the body, supporting insulin function. So if you have insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, obesity, butyrate is the mechanism, or one mechanism we know of, because I'm sure there are others, that supports the anti-obesity and anti-diabetic activity that the probiotic culture brings to the table. It supports efficient immune system activity. Research is now showing, and I published a paper in peer-reviewed journals currently, many years ago actually, showing how butyrate supports cognition and serotonin efficiency and even combats autism syndromes. So we've seen a lot of behavioral issues associated with imbalances between butyrate, propionate, and other short-chain fatty acids. And that takes us right back to the probiotic culture and the gut-brain axis that you know very well of. In fact, the gut cells, when they're healthy and they're getting their butyrate fuel from the probiotic culture, produce serotonin that ends up supporting cognition and behavior and antidepressive activity. So the one thing you got to keep in mind, and this is just mind-blowing, it's not so much that the probiotic culture and a healthy microbiome is a treatment for disease. That's not the way we need to look at this. We have to change perspective. It is the derailing of the probiotic culture, that contributes to inefficiencies or metabolic inefficiencies, because our biological system co-evolved with the bacterium, with this culture, to depend on the metabolites that they produce. And if those metabolites aren't there, we cannot produce them. We cannot create short-chain fatty acids from our prebiotic foods, like soluble fibers. Inulin is one. Fructooligosaccharides, which we've heard of. And we see them on the label if they're added to different foods. The major cause of this derailing of the probiotic culture is our processed first world foods. You know, if you eat at McDonald's every day and you're eating processed foods, hey, if you're going to McDonald's once in a while and you tolerate that well, great. But these foods are not only void of the natural whole fibers that feed the probiotic culture, but they have chemicals and preservatives in them that also interfere metabolically and even induce apoptosis or death of that culture. Stress, imposing unnecessary stress loads on the body. The stress hormones affect the culture. And it's an interesting thing to understand what happens in the body when we take probiotics, the supplements, to re-inoculate this culture in the gut. It's not that simple, because people think that probiotic culture generally seeds a new population, and it's not so much that. What happens is that the probiotics that we may consume may begin to produce some of the butyrate and other short-chain fatty acids that then create the environment for your original population to flourish, you see? Because each of us have individual, this is very interesting. I can take a fecal sample from me and from someone else, and even though we live in proximity and do the same things, we may have a slightly differential probiotic culture. And here's that amazing thing to understand. Like, please understand when you're thinking about what you should do to re-inoculate and maintain the probiotic culture in the body. The human body may have human mammalian cells to the tune of about 30 trillion, and some reports estimate 40 trillion cells, okay? So your human body is made up of approximately 40 trillion cells at tops. But within your body and without on the surface, and you have approximately 30 to 35 trillion bacteria that make up this probiotic culture and other cultures throughout the body on the surface and other orifices. So the bacterial count that makes up your human existence is roughly a 1-to-1 ratio. Some people have said 10-to-1. It's not really 10-to-1. The latest research is showing it's a 1-to-1. So about 35 trillion cells that are mammalian human, that are you, and 30 to 35 trillion cells that are microbial. You depend on that so much. Think about this next level of comparison. The human genome has approximately 20,000 genes, 20,000 genes, and not all of them are active all the time. But the bacterium can have up to 100,000 each. And the diverse population can be providing your body in excess of 2 million genes compared to your 20,000. Like, that's unbelievable. What does that mean? You could say, well, how is that even relevant? Why that's relevant is because many of those genes are expressing themselves to produce chemicals, metabolites that we humans depend on for health. And it is the derailment, again, I'm saying this again, the derailment or the compromising of that microbiota, that probiotic culture, that reduces the amount and the types and the diversity of these metabolites from the bacteria that your body depends on to function normally. So adding probiotics to your food, improving the prebiotics, the fiber in your diet, diverse diet. Now, here's the interesting thing. The more diverse, this is research-based, the more diverse this probiotic culture is in your gut and throughout the body, the more diverse it is, the lower risk you have for disease. The more robust it is, the lower risk you have for disease. And so as it becomes compromised for reasons that might be stress, poor diet, chemicals in your diet, antibiotics are the biggest killer. And so as you diminish that, then you have a high risk for infections, high risk for diabetes and obesity, to the point that I'm going to give you some anecdotes and research outcomes that are just mind-boggling, that really solidify and show convincing data anecdotally and clinically of how important that microbiota and microbiome is, whatever you want to call it. Research has been done with mice that are void of their probiotic culture. So they're born specifically to void the probiotic culture so that we know how they behave and function and survive. And the research shows irrefutably that they act with dysfunctional behavior. They don't act like mice. They have symptoms that appear to be similar to autism. They don't socially interact. And metabolically, they're dysfunctional. And immunologically, they're dysfunctional. You take then a fecal sample from a healthy mouse and you transplant it into the sick mouse that has avoided probiotic culture. And that sick mouse then very quickly begins to act healthy, act normal, behaviorally functional, begins to interact socially. It shows that there's some activity taking place, some of which we may not know, but some that we do, related to the short-chain fatty acids that cross the blood-brain barrier and affect the brain in a way that's positive. And we've seen that. I've reported that about 7 years ago in the research in peer-reviewed journals. Now, we can take mice that are obese and have diabetes, implant a fecal transplant in a healthy mouse, and the healthy mouse begins to express characteristics of obesity and diabetes very quickly. We can do the opposite. Take a fecal transplant from a healthy mouse into an obese animal after voiding a significant portion of their pathogenic culture, and suddenly the obese and diabetic animal begins to function normally and has expressed anti-diabetic and normalized metabolic activity. What does that say? It solidifies the fact that that culture, if maintained healthy, has a significant impact on the metabolism and on the brain. It's unbelievable. Now, the latest research on humans, now translating that, from mice to humans, extrapolating, one could say, well, wait a second, we can't extrapolate to humans, but you can, to a degree, to then take the model and go to humans. And it's been done. An extract of fecal matter from a healthy human into a diabetic and obese human begins to cause the effects of diabetes and obesity to decline. And so we're improving the health of the individual that may have metabolic syndrome by adding a probiotic culture from a fecal transplant of a person who we know is healthy. So if you say, hey, wait a minute, I'm obese and I can't lose weight because it's genetically embedded in me, okay, you might be right, but it's not your genes that are causing the problem. It's the avoidance of the genes from your probiotic culture that should be healthy that's causing the problem, you see? And so behavioral problems, cognitive problems, they too can be highly related to a healthier, to a dysfunctional probiotic culture that can be treated with a healthier culture. So I became interested in this long ago because I was diagnosed while competing in bodybuilding with ulcerative colitis. And I began to gain a significant interest in curcuminoids as anti-inflammatory substances. But it became clear that curcuminoids didn't work for everybody in the same way. And one of the factors that was evident was those who had a healthy probiotic culture had better results from curcuminoid treatment than those who did not. And it's very clear that that probiotic culture actually metabolizes, for its own health and yours, polyphenols. So the polyphenols in a lot of these vegetables are fuel for the probiotic culture, and they create metabolites that are healthy for your colon and for your body from those polyphenols that then become systemic throughout the body and affect the body in positive ways. You can see how much we rely on these things, not just for the digestion of fiber to create compounds that our body depends on metabolically, but polyphenols and other things that we may be using to treat conditions are actually being metabolized by the probiotics to deliver metabolites of the compound we think is treating us, but it's the metabolite from that probiotic that microbe. So going back to how we can think about preserving the probiotic culture, first of all, critically important when we're born to think about. When we're born, we don't have a significant culture in the gut. It is cultured while we exit through the vaginal canal. So what happens to those who come out the sunroof from a cesarean? Definitely have a compromised probiotic culture for a short period of time while you begin to accumulate bacterium from the environment. And it's shown that there's a higher risk for autism, inflammatory disease, autoimmune disease as well, for people who have a compromised microbiome at birth, because it is that at birth that kind of sets the stage for what you're going to create as a platform that grows as you get older as an adult. So we can modify the effectiveness of the probiotic culture as we age through our diet and making sure that we're healthy, perspective, reducing stress. But if you take a probiotic supplement, your body will generally shift the probiotic culture. And after you stop taking the supplement, it tends to migrate back to where you were, unless your dietary habits are providing the body with a significant amount of fiber. Now, the one thing that I began to do as I competed in bodybuilding and then with age was really think about how we feed the probiotic culture, because we don't think about, hey, I'm going to eat fiber because I need to feed my probiotic culture. We think, some people, I can tell you this from personal experience in my family, my son, I have to sneak vegetables into shakes and into food. He doesn't like vegetables, but we have to begin thinking differently. How do I feed the probiotic culture so I perform as a human being optimally? We have to think about, what do I like for me to eat? What does my probiotic culture, independent of me, but one that I depend on, what is it like? And then consume that. We get up in the morning, we feed our dog, we feed our cat, feed our fish if we have it, and then we go on our way. But we don't think about feeding the probiotic culture independent of what we like to eat. We have to kind of move out of selfish mode and change perspective. If you want to be optimally healthy, you have to improve that probiotic culture and maintain it. And the better it is, the more effective you will be as a human being athletically and as you age. Now, this is an interesting fact Okay. Interesting fact. The probiotic culture produces the butyrate. Butyrate then runs out, and there are tons of immune cells that line the colon. These immune cells then create cytokines that penetrate and become systemic throughout the body to regulate immune system. So Treg cells are prolific. These are regulatory cells of the immune system, Treg cells, prolific in the colon, and they secrete IL-10. This is a cytokine that's anti-inflammatory, you see? So as the body tends to want to be inflammatory, as it reacts to certain things in the environment, to foods you eat, things, these probiotic cultures help the body create a feedback program that offsets the inflammatory tendency that we tend to have. We eat foods, they tend to be inflammatory, especially if they're high glycemic index. We encounter environmental impositions, whether they're toxins that are inflammatory. COVID, inflammatory, cytokine storms the body. People who had a healthy microbiotic culture were better equipped to tolerate and resist COVID and had reduced mortality. Why? Because these Treg cells help to mitigate full-blown cytokine storm. The Treg cells produce IL-10, interleukin-10, which is one of the cytokines that is anti-inflammatory, whereas most cytokines, interleukin-1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 11, 12, 13, these are inflammatory. TNF, right? TNF alpha, inflammatory. IL-10, anti-inflammatory. And so you have this offset that's initialized by the probiotic culture, the butyrate. And this was one of the things that I stumbled upon early on with butyrate, and I began to use it in my research to couple it to compounds that would help reduce inflammation, improve immune system response to triggers, and it helped improve my colitis condition initially, coupling that with curcuminoids. But later on, as I began to study why, I want to know the mechanism, I began to realize that butyrate is associated with so many metabolic targets that our body, our metabolism depends on the short-chain fatty acid to regulate immunity, okay? So critically important to know and critically important to think about changing perspective. Okay. Perception is reality. That's my slogan. You've heard it before. It's not just mine. I use it all the time. Perception is reality. And that perception is now to change. And that is, you need to think about what the probiotic culture needs to be optimally fed. And it needs a diversity of vegetables. The more diverse the vegetable sources, the more diverse your probiotic culture, because they each need kind of different profiles of soluble fiber, but in particular inulin. If you can begin to think about inulin, artichokes, onions, garlic, they all have lots of inulin. You can even take inulin supplements to help support the probiotic culture. It creates gas and distension if you have a lot. What's happening there? Well, the probiotic culture is creating these volatile fatty acids, farty acids, and these volatile fatty or farty acids tend to become gaseous, and so that's the gas we produce. But if you're producing that, then you begin to you know that you're getting activity that's normalizing the environment to void pathogens, to improve immunological control, subdue autoinflammatory activity, and produce insulin function that's efficient for sport and cognitive function that's, ready to go. Hey, depression. Depression now is recognized as an inflammatory condition, interleukin-6 being a systemic cytokine that penetrates into the brain and affects the brain in a dysfunctional way. And if you can reduce that inflammation that starts from the gut, you improve behavioral conditions. Okay? The probiotic culture is the key. It is not a treatment to enhance probiotic culture, but it is a countermeasure to recover the damage that the diet and lifestyle may have caused. And antibiotics. We've all been exposed to antibiotics. They're critically needed sometimes to recover from disease. But when you take antibiotics, you've got to quickly restore with probiotic supplements, not your 100,000 or 1,000 units, billions. I very often, once a month, will take a 90 billion to 120 billion capsule for about 5 to 10 days. And then I'm fine. I'll do that. If I'm traveling, going to India, China, I'll take 200 billion for 2 weeks every day before I go, 200 billion during, 200 billion for 2 weeks after I get back, and I don't get sick from the change in the microbes that exist in the different environment. So that's how important it is. The probiotic culture is critical for health and performance. Feed it. Consciously feed it. Change perspective when you're eating. This is protein for my muscle mass. This is my carb source, clean carb source for my glycogen load. And here's my vegetable array for my probiotic culture that will serve me, because I need that culture to offset and synergize my metabolism if I want to be optimal. The potential is within you to be optimal. Each of these things we talk about are small additive features that create an amazing human being that's idling within you. Franco Cavaleri, Potential Within. Have a great day.